If you're trying to recover from a difficult relationship, particularly an abusive relationship, one of the most important things you can do is to break your isolation. Often, very often, people who have been in abusive relationships become isolated, and that is so deleterious to recovery. It's so hard to get your bearings and to know what's real and to know what's not. Very often people are subjected to an insidious process where the reality is questioned. So there was actually a study, it's probably 10 years old now, where the researchers just looked at different groups and of people who had been through not actually abusive relationships, but a horrible trauma of some kind. It turned out the people who did best, who were the least likely to develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder after that event, were the ones who were not isolated, who had support. The best thing that you can do for yourself if you've been through an abusive experience is to make sure that you have lots of support. Share your story. It's so important to recovery. I want to quickly go through some terms just so you have some background. When we use the word narcissist, what most people now in the lay audience and the average reader, the average person out there means is somebody who's extremely narcissistic. They mean, in other words, someone with narcissistic personality disorder. But there is a whole range, but just terms first. To call someone a narcissist in the research or in the clinical literature may or may not mean that they are disordered. They may or may not have narcissistic personality disorder. In fact, what it means is they're simply higher in narcissistic traits on a measure than the average person. NPD, like most personality disorders, is a pervasive disturbance in the person's ability to manage their feelings, to organize their emotions, to manage their relationships, to maintain healthy intimacy in relationships, even to maintain their career. It's a severe disturbance and it's pervasive. Even when a person is fairly highly functioning, you will see, meaning if they seem to be fairly well put together at times, you'll see outbreaks of these problems. One thing that in particular happens if they get anxious, often they don't think as clearly, something called a thought disorder, which is really common when somebody is struggling with a personality disorder. Now, the DSM actually makes it very confusing. The current DSM-5 makes it very confusing as to how to understand the nature of narcissistic personality disorder, but there's some very simple ways to understand it. What I want to do is outline those for you. Let's talk about narcissistic personality disorder. The best way to understand if that's what you're dealing with is to look for what I call the 3 E's. Exploitation, that is a pattern, a pervasive pattern of doing whatever it takes to get your needs met. Entitlement, acting as the world and other people owe them. And empathy impairments. This is a really important point to make. People talk about a lack of empathy or somebody with narcissistic personality disorder even being incapable of empathy. That's an old understanding. It's an old understanding of empathy. We now since have learned, there was a review of research, a large body of research from a group of psychologists who've done a lot of work on empathy. And what they've concluded is, just looking at how it all works, is that empathy is really a choice that we all have this capacity unless we have some kind of neurological deficit. And in the case of psychopathy, that might actually be what's going on. But what happens is we become blocked, we become preoccupied. Now, what all narcissists, extremely narcissistic people, narcissists who have NPD have in common is they have a strong drive to feel special. This is a point I want to make really clear. If you are looking at somebody who is extremely narcissistic, if you're looking at somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, who shows those signs of triple E, it can take many different forms, because what I want you to start to think of narcissism as is an addiction. It's like an addiction to feeling special. But remember, there's lots of ways to feel special. So when most people think of the word narcissist or narcissism, they think of vain, reigning, primping, boastful braggarts like reality TV types. But the reality is not all narcissists care about looks or fame or money, and some can be extremely quiet. So you need to know what they all have in common. And one thing they all have in common is this extreme drive to feel special. And now the triple E makes sense. Think of it like an addiction to feeling special, where just like any drug that somebody uses to soothe themselves, they'll lie, steal, cheat, do whatever it takes to get their high. But there's lots of ways to get the high. So you can feel special by being the most misunderstood person in the room. There's a kind of narcissism I call introverted narcissism. It's often called hypersensitive or covert narcissism in the research. I prefer introverted. I think it's clearer and cleaner because they are introverted. And so they can be shy and even self-doubting, but they answer questions like, I'm temperamentally different than most people. They agree with statements like that. Or they agree with statements like, nobody understands the kind of problems that I have. You can see that has nothing to do with self-esteem. So that is introverted narcissism. The really bold one that people tend to think of, the charmer, the manipulator, open manipulator, is extroverted narcissism. Exactly the way it sounds. They tend to be very outgoing. They are drawn to fame, to fortune. They might be focused on their looks. That's the classic idea of narcissism we tend to think of. But now there's a third category about somebody who's so focused on feeling like they're the most helpful person in the world, that's what makes them special. This is called communal narcissism in the research. At least now the DSM-5 touches on this idea of vulnerability, which I don't really like that word, because if narcissists could be extremely vulnerable, they wouldn't have the trouble they do in relationships. I think what people mean by that is fragile or reactive, and it's not the same thing. But so communal narcissists actually agree with statements like, I'm the most helpful person I know. So you can see there's this whole variety. And as it becomes more and more extreme, we get into disorder. We can have disordered versions of these high trait narcissists. Now, can I really trust this person? How do I know if they're willing to change? And there's actually a very clear answer to that. First of all, anybody who is changing, it doesn't matter if they're working on their struggles with alcoholism, it doesn't matter if they're working on their struggles with gambling or even self-esteem, they're going to have moments where they backslide. And if you think of this like an addiction, people have slips with addictions. So as soon as you start viewing it this way, that extremely narcissistic people are addicted to feeling special. And they use that to soothe themselves instead of when they're sad or scared or lonely, turning to others for openly for support and depending on them in emotionally healthy ways. It's a self-soothing of a kind, just like a drug. It's hard to beat an addiction. It takes time. So one thing you want to understand is even if a person is devoted to doing the work, and many people who are extremely narcissistic might not be, you're signing on for a long haul, and you have to decide if that's something that you want to do. There will be slips. Anybody who's devoted to change is going to make mistakes. They're going to slip back. And in this case, this means more narcissism. Now, the one thing I also want to make clear, you can't know for sure what's going on. Only time will tell, and behavior will tell. But some things will make it clear. So, for example, if your partner who's devoted to change is able to, in a genuine, authentic way, tell you when they're sad, tell you when they're lonely, instead of turning to these narcissistic ways of coping, which usually include things like being argumentative and having to be right, finding someone to put on a pedestal, whether it's you or others, or even being downright demeaning in the case of abuse. If they can be open and vulnerable, more importantly, if you can see that they are touched by your pain. We know this from the research, that true repair in a relationship happens when people feel like their partner really gets, on an emotional level, how they hurt them. That is true change. If you see that, then yes, there's hope for any of the problems. But that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be slips back into old behavior, because there are for any part of change. And you have to decide whether or not you want to stick around for that work. That is a very personal decision. But caveats. When are there signs of danger? Well, narcissism at its most dangerous is marked by the presence of 3 patterns of behavior. If you are in a relationship where somebody is emotionally abusive, calling you names, gaslighting, for those of you who don't know, that's where the person is trying to convince you that you're the quote-unquote crazy one. That is a form of emotional abuse, and it can be quite devastating. So ongoing emotional abuse, if the person shows a pattern of denial, can someone be helped if they're in denial of their problem? No. No, they can't. They can't, and I just want you to be really clear about this. I call these the 3 stop signs. Ongoing emotional physical abuse where the person can't acknowledge and won't change it. You're in a dangerous situation. You need to get support and help in leaving. You need to break your isolation. Denial, where the person can't even admit in some small way, I think there's something wrong, they won't go to therapy. Another bad sign. If somebody's in denial, it doesn't matter what the problem is, whether it's gambling, whether it's being extremely narcissistic, substance abuse, it's not going to get better. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. If you can't look at it, if you can't look at it closely and work on it, nothing is going to be any different. And the third is psychopathy. Briefly, psychopathy is a pattern of remorseless lies and deceit. This is where the person lies without flinching to your face over and over again. It may be a hint of extreme psychopathy, and there's some evidence that people who are extremely psychopathic don't even experience emotions in quite the same way. The combination of extreme psychopathy and extreme narcissism, where somebody has narcissistic personality disorder and a strong streak of psychopathy, this is where the problems blend together. Very often this is somebody who falls into what's called cluster B in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And the combination of psychopathy and narcissism is dangerous. It's been known for a long time as malignant narcissism. And if you see that combination, if you see those three stop signs, I want you to get help thinking about what helps, what keeps you stuck, and maybe we can talk about some of those things, especially if the person has no commitment to change. No, there is no hope if the person is in denial. That's very clear. In fact, in a research study where they actually measured denial, starting at an early age, over 20 years, people who showed denial throughout their life as a way of coping grew up to become extremely narcissistic, express a lot of unhealthy narcissism, the triple E, if you will, all the nasty qualities. And so denial is a really strong predictor of the worst outcomes. If you see denial, it is not a good sign. Envy or sour grapes. If a person is secure in themselves, they don't need to put others down in order to feel good about themselves. And a little word on empathy impairments. The reason it gets very confusing for people when they're in a relationship is, as I was talking about earlier, for most of us, we have the capacity. So it's now understood that somebody, even with narcissistic personality disorder, has fluctuating empathy. If they are motivated and they are not blocked, you may see flashes of it in relationships with, say, affair partners or even you, and that's what gets confusing. You cannot use that as an indicator. As I said, a better indicator is triple E, and where you think of the empathy as fluctuating. It's not like it's not there sometimes. Are they capable of feeling love? The answer is it depends. It depends if they're in the milder range, because I also want to speak to people out there who are not experiencing abuse, where they're with a partner where they feel neglected, where they feel like their partner is arrogant and aloof. There are no put-downs. There's no physical abuse, but you feel alone, more alone in the relationship than you do when you're by yourself. Somehow you feel more lonely and emotionally isolated. The milder the form of narcissism, I call this subtle narcissism. This is somebody who, they have the grandiosity. All people who are narcissistic, as you could tell from the description, have the grandiosity. But they may not be outward about it. It may be secret dreams that they keep hidden, and then it just sort of flares up at a moment they feel insecure. They hover not at the extreme end where they would be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, but they show other signs, and let me talk about those. And then they can spike into even the range of pathology in moments where they feel insecure. This is what I call subtle narcissism. And I call the problem, the hallmark of subtle narcissism, the entitlement surge, where suddenly they're cut off what people often call supplies. Problem happens at work, they don't get a promotion, something happens that shakes their self-esteem, and suddenly you're on the receiving end of all kinds of demands, because part of what entitlement does is it gives people a sense of control, and it gives them a sense of power, and that helps them feel special. If you're bowing down to me and I don't have to ask you for anything, I don't have to feel dependent on you, I can just get what I want, then I can feel special in that way. So the entitlement surges. At the lower range, yeah, you're going to see, this is what gets confusing, you're going to see signs where the person can be very loving and very caring in moments until something blocks them, until something blocks their empathy. Very often people who are extremely narcissistic have had traumas in their past, and that have been abused or neglected, and they wind up cutting off their emotions, or getting good at cutting off their emotions, hence the pattern of lying and the way the sense of love seems to come and go. So are they capable of love? The question is your partner capable of the kind of love that you want? That is reliable, that is secure, what we call secure attachment. That is where you're feeling sad or scared or lonely or blue, that you know that you can turn to them and they can understand and they can be there for you no matter what, like that one special person in your life that gets you, that understands you. Can they love you in that way? And that's the question you have to answer. That's what you have to be really clear about.